Welcome to NovaraLive. Coming up tonight, a leaked Pentagon email suggests US President Donald Trump is out for revenge against allies who didn't join him in his illegal attacks on Iran. We speak with Welsh Greens leader Anthony Slaughter. Sami Hamdi absolutely wrecks a racist on Piers Morgan. And we ask, when is stealing an act of political resistance? I'm Helena, otherwise known as NoJusticeMTG, and it's a Friday, so I'm doing a Michael Walker impression. So who better to join me on this beautiful Friday evening than Aaron Bastani? Aaron, how you doing?
Very well, Helena. How are you?
I'm doing absolutely elated to be joined by you for the first time, I believe, as my co-host in the studio.
It does feel rather strange, different, but I'm ready for it. I'm welcoming it.
Absolutely. Change is good. Change is good.
It's critical, and we're very happy to have you at Novara as a co-host, and now as a host. You bring so much to the show.
Thank you very much. So much. Regularly scheduled Michael Walker program will be back next week. Do not worry, people who miss Michael at home. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. You can also listen to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and do not forget to let us know what you think in the comments section down below. A leaked email from the Pentagon appears to show that the US President Donald Trump's Washington administration is out for revenge. On who? Well, all those allies who refused to get involved in its illegal war on Iran, and it wants to use NATO to do it. First reported by Reuters, the email suggests that the US could seek to suspend Spain from NATO after the country refused US military flights to Iran access to its airspace and bases. The Spanish government, led by Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, has been vocally opposed to the illegal war on Iran since its outset. Following the initial wave of attacks on the 28th of February, Spain refused to allow its US bases to Spain refused to allow the US access to its bases. Days later, in an address to the Spanish parliament, Sanchez declared the country was saying no to war and accused the US of playing Russian roulette with the destiny of millions. In the middle of March, Spain permanently withdrew its ambassador to Israel, a protest at the country's genocide in Gaza, as well as its involvement with the illegal attacks on Iran. Then, late last month, the country closed its airspace to US aircraft involved in the attacks, calling the US-Israel war on Iran profoundly illegal and unjust. Of all European countries, Spain has been the most consistent in its opposition to the war, both materially and rhetorically. Sanchez arrived at an informal EU summit this morning, looking pretty relaxed about Washington's threats. Asked about the Pentagon email, Sanchez said that his government doesn't work on the basis of emails. Rather, he said, it works on the basis of its official documents and official positions. And the official position of the Spanish government, he said, is very clear. Full cooperation with its allies, but always within the international framework of law. Of course, some figures in the US administration have made it clear that they're not that interested in international law, but NATO isn't likely to be the forum to pursue vendettas. The treaty organization operates on consensus, and its founding treaty has no mechanism for suspending or expelling member states. NATO also has no direct role in the illegal Iran war beyond defending its own territory, though of course some member states, like the UK, have been much more relaxed about allowing the US military access to use our bases. Now, Aaron, the leverage that Donald Trump has here is obviously pretty minimal in terms of what the actual treaty within NATO says, but what it does exemplify is what was being said last year by people like Zach Polanski, for example, about the unreliability of the United States as an ally, and it also dovetails into what Mark Carney was saying beforehand about the greater powers pushing smaller powers around using these kind of agreements to do this. But what do you think should be the reaction from European countries to this kind of rhetoric?
Well, it should be calling out the reality as a first step. And what is the reality? Effectively, American empire has been the dominant global empire since 1945. But it's been a particular kind of empire. It was an empire that said it wasn't an empire, and that people that were subordinate to it were actually allies, and they did so of their own free volition, even if all the wealth and all the value went from the periphery to the core, Western Europe, but increasingly North America. I think we need to call this out for what it is, which is actually not an alliance or a coalition, it's vassalage. The genius of American empire, really, in the decades before Trump, was to present vassalage, domination, subordination as something else. But actually, Trump's just been honest about the nature of the relationship. It's transactional. Rana Gupta, who I interviewed recently for Novara on Downstream, said it very well. He said, in the 20th century, we saw the universalization of the nation state as the basic unit of global affairs. And the nation state should be seen as an analog to the province of the Roman Empire. And that is how Trump views nation states like France, Britain, Spain, South Korea, Japan. These are provinces. And if they don't do what they're told by the imperial capital in Washington, then there will be consequences. These are not sovereign, democratic, self-governing countries. Of course, that's not new. Like I say, we've had American imperium for a long period of time, but we've now moved to an overt admission about what it really is. And I think we now need to call this out. And I think we need to call out in two ways. Say something shifted under Trump, but actually, and this was the genius of the Mark Carney speech, be honest about the decades before that as well. And I think as well, the left should not be timid about trying to play a central role in what a new world order looks like. It's very easy to be a pacifist and recoil from those kinds of conversations, but I think actually we're very much needed.
100%. What was interesting as well is the reaction to the kind of rhetoric from Trump, from like the American liberal establishment about the kind of things that he was saying, but they didn't seem to understand that he was just saying what had been implicit up until then, right? The reaction when, for example, the first group of countries said, we're not going to engage in this war on Iran. And the reaction from the Trump administration was like, well, no, but you are supposed to be our vassal states, right? We spent all this money on you in terms of military expenditure to have this military envelope where America protects you out of our own good graces, our own benevolence with which we're providing you this sphere of protection. And it is biting the hand that feeds to not involve themselves in these wars and whatever America is doing in the Middle East, which of course, that's not true. It's always been, as you say, vassalage. It's always been in the interest of American empire to have its own states in the region, have its own ability to have military powers in the region, right? That's in America's interest. That is a symbiotic relationship in terms of the military versus economic gains for America. It's not one way. It's not benevolent. America has material interests there. And saying these things openly, making it clear about this relationship is what is an issue to American liberals, not the fact that he said it at all.
And I think that's very well put. Hegel talks about the owl of Minerva. Once something is over and behind you, you can actually recognize that historical moment for what it was. You can't really understand the nature of a political moment when you're inside of it. And I feel like Trump is kind of like the owl of Minerva, right? He's calling American empire actually this imperial project because it's in some ways not behind us, but clearly its most dominant years are, indisputably behind us. I do think this is a particular problem for Britain, though, because more than any other country, Britain has thrown its lot in with Atlanticism, with America. And I do think it was something said by people like Paul Mason, who, I don't agree with him on very much these days, but this I do agree with him on. If Jeremy Corbyn had the exact same project, but said I'm an Atlanticist and I'm pro-America, his job would have been a hell of a lot easier. That is such an important trench, an ideological and political trench for the British establishment. And I think, for instance, if you look at the Financial Times, one of the reasons they can't understand why the Starmer project is collapsing is they look at the guy, they think, well, hold on, you're quote unquote moderate, you're sensible, you're an Atlanticist, you know your role in all of this, you'll have big houses in London, and yet you've been 2 years into a government and the whole thing's falling to pieces. How is that even possible? That's not what British politics is meant to look like. And so I think the crisis of the Labour Party and the crisis of legitimacy for the Labour Party actually goes hand in hand with this unique moment for British politics where more than any other country, we are screwed, not just by the demise of American empire, but how America is responding to the demise of American empire now with, the second Trump presidency.
Well, exactly. We hold so many treasuries. We have huge amounts of our economy entirely tied up in our financial sector, which is entirely dependent on American investment, American trade, American engagement with that financial sector. Top of this, in terms of national security and defense, at least you look at France, they have their own sovereign nuclear deterrent. We don't. Yeah. We don't. Ours all service, ours all entirely dependent upon that relationship staying at least somewhat cordial. Yeah. And I think we'll be moving on to what a breakdown of that cordiality looks like just now. As I said a moment ago, the UK has allowed the US military to use our bases for their attacks on Iran, but only for what the Prime Minister Keir Starmer has called defensive purposes, whatever that means. That hasn't been enough to keep us off the Pentagon's leaked hit list. According to the email, the US could review Britain's claim over the Falkland Islands, also known as the Malvinas, and claimed by Argentina because of our lack of a support for Trump's illegal and highly costly Iranian adventure. Historically, the US has generally given the UK diplomatic support when it comes to our claim over the Falklands. The US's position on the Falklands laid out on the State Department's website, which says this: "This is a bilateral issue that needs to be worked out directly between the governments of Argentina and the United Kingdom. We encourage both parties to resolve their differences through dialogue and normal diplomatic channels. We recognise de facto United Kingdom administration of the islands, but take no position regarding sovereignty." A spokesperson for 10 Downing Street has responded to the Pentagon email saying this: "We could not be clearer about the UK's position on the Falkland Islands. It is long-standing, it is unchanged. Sovereignty rests with the UK, and the island's right to self-determination is paramount. It's been our consistent position and will remain the case." Aaron, as we said before, there is this power dynamic between the US and the UK, which the US genuinely feel that they can take advantage of if we don't do what we tell them to do so. And obviously this is one smaller part of it in terms of the fact that the US has been allowed to be the dictator of what constitutes sovereignty in so many cases for so long in the post-World War II period. And this is applying to us now because we have refused to find a way of decoupling ourselves up to now. Isn't that right?
A really good example, actually, is the Suez Crisis in the 50s.
True.
For people who aren't familiar with this, you have the British and the French work with the Israelis. They want to secure access to the Suez, which has been nationalized by the Nasser government and a pan-Arab nationalist, secular nationalist government. And militarily, it's quite successful, unlike this escapade in Iran recently by the US, to which it's often compared. But the Americans aren't happy. And the Americans, within a few days of this happening, say, if you don't leave the Suez and leave it to the Egyptians, we will impose sanctions on your economy. This is by the United States, the British in the 50s, right? That is an extraordinary moment when you think, even until maybe 1940, Britain was considered a more powerful global player than the US, 1940, 1941. By the late 50s, mid-50s, America is saying, if you don't do what you're told, we will impose sanctions on you. And I don't think nearly enough people are aware of that. And that was 70 years ago. Could happen again. I mean, people really need to take this seriously. If we don't do what we're told by Trump, it's quite plausible that we have sanctions imposed on us. Of course, tariffs are the first step in that regard. But you could see, particularly the loss of access to certain financial services infrastructure, certain US banks not being able to do business here, et cetera. It would nuke the global economy, for sure. But my goodness, it would kill the city of London and Britain. And that, to some extent, explains the timidity of Starmer et al. They're timid people already, but I really think this can't be stated enough. We are not a sovereign country. We are not a sovereign country. You've mentioned the nukes, military technology, the F-35s. F-35s have hundreds of kilos of rare earth metals in them. Do you think they're here? Do you think we've got the supply chains here? No, we don't. They're in the US, albeit only for a few months. So even to the point where our military isn't actually our own, our security services, the web servers they use for their digital operations are Amazon, owned, AWS. So this is a really cool thing. And I think even if you were Starmer or a Starmer supporter, but a smart person, you'd say, we need to decouple, but we want to do it in a calm, pragmatic way over 5-10 years. I don't think we've got 5-10 years, frankly.
No, that's what we've seen the Europeans already looking towards having a European-owned payment process, for example, whereas we're currently everything going through Visa and MasterCard, that could get cut off at a moment's notice.
100%.
If there's any problems. And what's interesting is that the political wing of the UK at the moment that is talking in the strongest terms about sovereignty is coming from the hard right. It's coming from the right wing of UK politics, whether it is from Reform or whatever it is. And these people openly embrace this vassalage. They openly embrace the fact that we will be necessary to be an extension of US hegemony for this entire period, right? They don't pretend to think that they can decouple because so much of their economic program, especially, is dependent upon it. I mean, we already are, as an economy, a retirement home with a financial sector attached to it. And that will only get expanded further if the right wing get their low immigration, continue with a triple lock, and they continue to have us entirely dependent upon American FDI, American engagement with the financial sector to be able to fund their economic program.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's not just about they're happy with the vassalage. They actually want to intensify it. And I'll give you one example. With regards to energy, right? Farage, Tice, et al. Will say that Britain has industrial energy that's too expensive. We're reliant on imports from the Gulf, Qatar, with LNG, for instance. And at the moment, they say, well, we should use more of our own coal. We should use more of our own gas and petrol in the North Sea. Coal is an obvious one, right? China right now burns more coal than the rest of the planet put together it powers their factories, basically, right? Although it's falling, and America's rising. That's a powerful argument, isn't it? The point is, of course, in those mines, particularly in South Wales, they're now filled with literally millions of gallons of water. But even if they weren't, I don't think that's what reform would do. Reform would not reopen the mines. They wouldn't double down on North Sea oil and gas. They'd want to do a deal with the Americans to get cheaper LNG. That's the smart play from Farage, right? I can leverage my unique relationship with the Trump White House to get cut price oil and gas from the Americans, which makes the problem even worse, right? We're even more dependent on US energy imports. So at a later date, if another American presidency, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, whoever, cuts the cord, it's even worse. So as part of a long-term problem, we're in a bad place, but a reform government would actually double down on these vulnerabilities. They wouldn't try to mitigate them, which I think we have to do now very urgently.
What's interesting too is that on the continent, there's this weird reversal that's gone on. Because the only real political party that's talking about this kind of breakaway is the Green Party at the moment in the United Kingdom, your party, people like that. And it's the right wing who have given up on trying to find an alternative route and are actively doubling down on this level of engagement with the United States. In Europe, it's flipped. The social democratic parties at the centre left have all caved. They've all caved to what's happening with Trump. There's some investors at the top of the EU, as I said, about payment processes and things like that, but they're not in any way breaking away from the kind of the geopolitics of all of this. And it's the far right. Yeah. It is parties like the AfD. We've seen Maloney stand up to Trump. But obviously, we might see this with Le Pen in future as well. Why do you think the dynamic is so different there than it is here?
It's a really great question. I think it relates in Europe to the question of the European Union. I think that fundamentally the European centre-left, and that would have included Britain until Brexit, they didn't believe in the idea of national sovereignty. They just didn't. And they still don't because they're still in the European Union. Whereas the right did. So the right has this sort of mental landscape in its mind about how actually the nation state should be the fulcrum of economic life, cultural life, government, self-government, right? So that's still quite an intuitive part of their politics. I mean, one of the reasons why Margaret Thatcher didn't like the European Union after Maastricht was she was saying, well, look, we're no longer a self-governing nation state. It's quite clear to me. She was right, by the way. Now, you might think that actually in a world of China, 1.4 billion people, the United States, 350 million people, we should have an integrated European. I mean,
that's been my point. I've actually,
maybe you believe that's fine.
I've changed on this, and that if we're going to see more belligerent trade, having access to a big geopolitical trade bloc, it's not the free market option anymore. It's the protectionist option.
Yeah, maybe that's
putting up big tariffs on China flooding Europe with electric vehicles to protect jobs in Europe. Like that's a power that we will be excising ourselves from by being outside of the EU, at least in terms of strength and the size of the geopolitical bloc.
There's something to that, but I would say that basically the European centre-left bought into that vision much more than the centre-right, and so they don't
they bought into the free market. They bought into the wage arbitrage and the access to cheap goods coming in from Eastern Europe or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on each different country. So you look at, for instance, the French radical right. They obviously have a different history on this stuff to the Germans. Going back to de Gaulle, of course, he was a quote-unquote centre-right politician, but people like Jordan Bardella, Le Pen, they draw on that idea of French grandeur. Depends where you're going. Of course, when you go further and further east, the Baltics, they are tied to the United States with a sort of proverbial umbilical cord for a good reason, because without American protection, they're not going to be countries anymore, frankly. Mm-hmm. They owe their existence to US empire. So it's kind of understandable, right? Similar case with Poland, although Poland is in a pretty good place now to protect itself. So it is a funny one, but the British, like I said a few minutes ago, the British sort of political context is very unique, and I think that's expressed in terms of the radical right, Farage, Tice, Zia Yusuf, how they view the United States as well. It's very, very, very unique. And I say to them, look, if you want us to become more integrated with the US, let's become the 51st state, right? We'll have loads of votes when it comes to deciding the president. What we have, I don't want to do that, but it's one thing on the table. What we have at the moment is the same thing that excised protesters in Boston in the 18th century. We have taxation without representation. We are paying an American tax by virtue of being a vassalage, but we don't get to determine the political outcomes inside the United States. Who's the president, etc., who's making those decisions.
And we literally are getting a situation now where we are placing our financial future, our economic future, our political future, and even our geopolitical future and our own defense in the hands of swing voters in Wisconsin who can elect a maniac at any point.
Yeah.
Now, what lies behind this is an exercise. So what lies behind this exercise in what looks like extreme pettiness on the part of the Trump administration? Well, it's pretty clearly a sign of desperation. That desperation was on display earlier today when US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth gave a press conference.
It's also worth saying, this should not be America's fight alone. We barely use the Strait of Hormuz as a country. Our energy doesn't flow through there, and we have plenty of energy. Just look at the new global Congo line headed to Texas. A beautiful picture. Europe and Asia have benefited from our protection for decades, but the time for free riding is over. America and the free world deserve allies who are capable, who are loyal, and who understand that being an ally is not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. We are not counting on Europe, but they need the Strait of Hormuz much more than we do, and might want to start doing less talking and having less fancy conferences in Europe and get in a boat.
I don't really want to give a history lesson, but it does sound like Hegseth needs one. Until February 28th this year, the Strait of Hormuz was open. Iran hadn't threatened to close it, and indeed had never closed it in the past. Then, the United States and Israel unilaterally began bombing the country, hitting 1,000 sites, including this girls' school in Manab, in which over 108 people were killed, mostly girls under the age of 13. The illegal assaults also struck civilian infrastructure, UNESCO World Heritage sites, and government buildings, killing senior Iranian military, political, and religious figures, including the then leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now, that is how all of this began, and because of it, the world continues to be in crisis, a crisis that the United States would dearly love to offload onto other countries. In that speech, Hegseth also declared that the US's war in Iran was a, quote, gift to the world. And then there's one sense in which he might very accidentally be right. Speaking to The Guardian, the head of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, has said that the current oil crisis will change the oil industry forever. Birol told The Guardian this about how countries' energy strategies will inevitably change as a result of the war. Their perception of risk and reliability will change. Governments will review their energy strategies. There will be a significant boost to renewables and nuclear power and a further shift towards a more electrified future. And this will cut into the main markets for oil. The vase is broken, the damage is done. It'll be very difficult to put the pieces back together. This will have a permanent consequences for the global energy markets for years to come. So what's interesting here, just quickly, Aaron, is that part of the Trump administration's first thing they did, the very first thing they did, cancel the Inflation Reduction Act, cancel all of those, all of the supply side subsidy, all of the industrial strategic subsidy for clean energy, and go all in on oil and gas, go all in on fracking, go all in on petrochemicals. And now they're incentivizing the rest of the world to no longer need the thing that they export the most, which is petrochemicals. This seems like a bit of a misfire.
I mean, they're morons. And, watching the Pete Hegseth clip, you do really want to wring the guy's neck, because often people say crazy things in politics. They don't really mean it. They've got to say something to get themselves out of a bit of a spot, a bit of a bind, which he obviously is in, right? But he really means it. He's a believer. And, watching that clip, you have to ask yourself, what are the Gulf states saying? You're the UAE, you're Qatar, you're Bahrain. You have an American base in your country. You're Saudi Arabia, you're Kuwait. And he's saying, look, end of the day, we don't really need this fucking part of the world, right? We're doing it because, for you guys, we don't really need it. And of course, the main areas of the world that are being punished as a result, the Gulf states, Asia, Europe. These are the three vassal regions of US global empire. And they're the three places now being harmed the most by this idiotic, insane, crazy war. Great article in the FT, not this weekend, but the weekend before, just about the centrality, actually maybe it was last weekend, about the centrality of the Gulf to just global fertilizer supplies. This is going to have massive knock-on impacts with regards to food prices in places like Africa, Europe, etc. And they haven't thought about that for a moment. And it's all downstream from their incompetence. But, at the end of the day, who's more of an idiot, Helena? Pete Hegseth for saying all this rubbish, right? But ultimately, the United States is insulated from a lot of the consequences. Not all of them, but a lot of them, because they're two oceans.
They're not going to deal with the refugee crisis, are they?
Yeah, they've got the two oceans. They've got their own energy. They've got geography favors America. Not entirely, but significantly. Who's more stupid? Pete Hegseth or the European politicians who allowed their own countries to become this vulnerable and this exposed to an idiot like Pete Hegseth? I think in a way it's the European politicians, right? It's the Mark Rutte's, it's the Tony Blairs, it's the Nicolas Sarkozy's. We can talk about how good the French model is, how robust it is, and it is, but my God, that man tried his best to destroy it. So this is what Europe signed up for. Maybe we're the bigger idiots than the Americans. I know it's hard for Europeans to say.
I mean, certainly there is one pole of this that's certainly winning all throughout, no matter what happens to Europe and the US, and it's China, clearly. China are the ones who are going to have loads of sovereign energy because they've been all that industrial subsidy that America cut into renewable production.
Yeah.
That's where China is now becoming the world leader, and Europe is going to be buying a lot of solar panels and a lot of green technology for the years to come.
I don't think people realise what's coming. I live in Portsmouth. Yesterday I was just walking the dog and I saw this big shiny BYD car charging. The JQs I'm seeing everywhere now. The Dinos have started to buy the JQ EVs. They're not all EVs, the JQs, but a lot of them are,
You should get your Xiaomi sports car.
Xiaomi, I haven't seen any Xiaomi sports cars yet, but I have seen a lot of JQ and BYD ones. And the funny thing is, and I don't know how, this is curious, how are Reform going to finesse this? In 5 years' time, loads of Reform voters are going to have Chinese EVs and solar panels on their houses because it's cheap and their lives are better as a result. So I do wonder how people like Richard Tyson and Farage will finesse it. They'll find a way, of course, because they're politicians.
We'll see. We shall see. We shall see. Welsh politics is set to be turned on its head in just 2 weeks' time. Labour's 27 years atop the Senedd seems almost certain to draw to a close. For months, it had been assumed that the heir apparent to the Labour Party would be Plaid Cymru, who've been polling in first ever since their stunning upset in the Caerphilly by-election last year. Things aren't looking so certain now, though, as Reform UK have been creeping up in the polls as the Labour vote has collapsed, with the latest YouGov poll showing them neck and neck with Plaid on a projected 37 MSs. But it's not just a case of who comes top of the pile in May. The Senedd is elected on closeless proportional voting, meaning that all parties have a much better chance of getting elected than under first past the post. So there will be at least some representation from minor parties, say, the Conservative Party. It can also lead to breakthrough moments for others too, and that's exactly what Welsh Green Party leader Anthony Slaughter is hoping for. They've never held a seat in the Welsh Parliament before, but buoyed by the meteoric rise of the party in England after the election of Zach Polanski as leader, they've gone from hoping for 1 or 2 seats at most to being third place in some polls, potentially vying for an opportunity to have influence in government formation come May the 8th. I am now delighted to be joined by Anthony to talk about the party's aspirations. Now, what I would say, Anthony, is that one thing has certainly been driving the Green Party's success across England and Wales, and indeed the Scottish Greens in Scotland, has been the policies that are being put forward. What kind of the main things that you're putting to voters in Wales come May the 7th?
Thank you, and thank you for having us on. It's really exciting time for us at the moment. Polls are going one way, and it's looking, we are going to have a significant group of Greens in the Senate. And you mentioned Zach Polanski. Zach has been a brilliant boost, but this was already happening. I came second in the constituency of Cardiff South and Penarth in the 2024 general election, which is a historic first for us in Wales. But the momentum has built and built since then. And then we took a very safe Labour council seat in Cardiff, in Grangetown last year. So what we're offering to the Welsh public, the Welsh voters electorate at this time, is radical policies to tackle the cost of living crisis. People are really hurting after 27 years of managed decline, mostly under a Labour government, Welsh Labour. We have shocking statistics. 1 in 3 children in poverty, people working precarious jobs, rents soaring. Cardiff had some of the highest soaring rent increases in the UK. So we're offering practical measures that can happen in the short term to tackle the cost of living crisis. So things like a rent freeze, while we bring a 1-year rent freeze, while we bring in ultimately rent controls. We're looking at replacing the unfair council tax, the land value tax system, and also free bus travel for under 22s, a £1 bus ticket for everyone else. It's these first steps, these important steps to start tackling, making people's lives that little bit easier because people are hurting. And they're getting a sense as they go into this election that we're just looking at a change of management, some tinkering around the edges. People are recognising that we need a real change. And that's the thing, that's the voice that the Greens can offer in the Senedd. We will be, in one way or another, holding the next Welsh Government to account and making sure they deliver faster and bolder for the people of Wales.
I mean, when it comes to a potential government formation, as I mentioned before, some polls have the Green Party coming up to third place, others slightly less so. So there's between 4 or 10 MSs, something like that is the number that we're looking at. And given that on current polling, it looks like Plaid Cymru most likely to be in prime position when it comes to government formation as well. When it comes to your personal ambition for how many MSs you're looking for and the potential for what a potential confidence supply arrangement could potentially look like come May the 8th, what are your kind of ambitions in that regard?
As you say, the polls have leapt from 4 or 5 to 10 or 11. 5's the magic number. That's a group. We have representation in the Senate as a political grouping then, which gives us much more resources. But I'm confident, I wouldn't put a number on it. I'm resisting putting a number on it, but I'm confident it will be a significant number. And I'm being asked a lot. The word that's been thrown around a lot is kingmakers. And as an ardent Republican, I wish we could find a better word for that. But yet people are asking, what would our red lines be if a future Plaid government needs our support in any shape or form? And we've been quite clear in the last few months what our priorities are. Some of the things I've touched on, protecting tenants, making people's lives easier, but also pushing for bolder action on climate and nature, because we're seeing the other parties in the Senate already rowing back on their already watered down commitments to tackling this crisis. So we are pushing for these things. And one of the things I need to say quite clearly, I've been speaking to the Scottish Greens a lot, my Scottish colleagues, and went to their conference last year because they've been there and done this. They've been in government with the SNP, delivered things that made Scottish people's lives better. But one of the key things I take from the Scottish Greens experience is that when the SNP started tinkering around the edges, and this is a trouble with perhaps traditional nationalist parties, the agenda can switch so quickly. But when the SNP started tinkering around the edges, the Greens walked away. And I want that message out there quite clearly ahead of the election as well, that Green support for a future Welsh government doesn't come just because you're not Reform or you're the least worst option. We're in that place to make sure we deliver real change for people in people's lives and their day-to-day existence. And if we're not doing that, then we would walk away from the table, or we would not help the next Welsh government. It's absolutely vital. People are hurting, they're crying out for change. And it's going to be momentous change, because this is after 27 years of Welsh Labour government here in Cardiff Bay. But also, let's not forget, Welsh Labour used to be very proud of the fact that they were the most successful political party in the democratic world, having not lost an election in Wales in 100 years. It's earth-changing, it's earth-shattering what's about to happen. They are going to have a small rump of Senate members, and it's an opportunity to change Wales for the better. And that's why people are saying to us on the doorstep, we want a strong group of Greens there to make sure that a Plaid government that we're in doesn't just become the next Keir Starmer.
When it comes to the policies that are being put forward, of course, the rent freeze is a really, really big one that I'm sure that lots of our viewers at home will be in favour of. But there are some policies, if you look at transport and investment, which is going to involve more money coming in from the public purse. In a potential position where you're there to influence policy, are you looking to see any kind of taxes being raised? Do you want to move money around from other budgets? Or are you going to be focusing on things that you can do straight away that don't require additional funding in terms of your priorities for any kind of potential discussions on policy with whoever does end up becoming in government?
There are two ways of looking at that. I mean, Wales has been shortchanged for so long. So we're looking at fairer funding for Wales. We're looking at the HS2 money we're owed. We're owed $5 billion. So we need to demand that money. There's the devolution of the Crown estate to make sure that Wales can benefit from its natural resources. And there's a fairer funding Barnett formula that needs to be reformed. But all of these things can't happen straight away. So we do have to operate within the constraints of the existing budget while pushing for that fairer funding for Wales. But we're looking at moving money around in existing budgets. We wouldn't put up income tax. The Liberal Democrats are floating the idea of putting up income tax by a penny to help pay for social care. The problem we have here in Wales is we don't have the flexibility over tax that the Scottish devolution settlement has. So putting income tax up here in Wales would only hurt the least well off the most. Until we've got the powers to shift the banding, we're not in a position to make sure that wealthier people pay more. So we're looking at, in some budgets like the NHS, which is a massive, massive issue, of moving money around from secondary care to primary care. But some of the things I've talked about, the things we want to do instantly, or as quickly as possible, the free bus travel, the rent freeze, these things, and introducing free school meals for secondary pupils, these things we have costed and priced, because we have to know if we're making those our priorities and we're telling the people of Wales that this is what we can deliver, we have to know it's doable. So we have costed those, and within the existing framework, they are doable. There is currently around 356 million unallocated money in the current budget. So we're looking at what we can do in the short term, what's there, but then also the long-term plans, and looking ahead, not just to this term, but to the next term, putting measures in place now that make sure people's lives get better, and not looking at it through the short-term spreadsheet lens of, you're going to spend this much money now and you're not going to get it back all in one go. These changes, I mean, people keep asking me, how much is this going to cost? What's the cost of doing these things? What's the cost of fixing the NHS? What's the cost of restoring and protecting nature? My answer to that is What's the cost of not doing it?
That's a very, very good point. Mariana Mazzucato was famous at saying that sometimes the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of action on Question Time. I use that quote very frequently. One last point I would make, though, is that the current poll that we looked at today on the channel is a YouGov poll that has Plaid Cymru and Reform UK neck and neck on both vote share and projected number of seats, potentially. And I think there might be a lot of people who are looking at the potential outcome in Wales and thinking the worst possible thing that could happen in this election is Reform UK to come first, and they'll be in prime position potentially to look at government formation as being top of the list in terms of the number of MSs that they've got. They could look at, for example, doing a deal with Labour potentially, just like there's been apparently alleged discussions in Scotland between Malcolm Offord and Anas Sarwar. What would you say to people at home who would say, I would love to vote Green, but I want to vote for the progressive option that's in the best place to ensure that Reform UK don't come first? What would be your response to that?
This is obviously something we hear a lot, and it's something I understand. I understand people's concern about this. Reform have to be stopped. Now, fortunately, Reform aren't going to have a majority, and even if they worked with the Conservatives, they wouldn't have a majority. Plaid, hopefully, will be the biggest party in the next Senedd because the alternative is unthinkable. But again, they won't have a majority. Now, under the new voting system, which people are starting to come to terms with, people are struggling to understand it. It is proportional. So we will get seats in proportion to the number of votes we get. So if people want our bold vision to do things now to fix people's lives in Wales and restore nature, they need that strong Green voice in the Senedd. Now, some parties are pretending it's a first past the post election and talking about it being a two-horse race. The reality is there is a cap on how many seats Plaid would get in any constituency. In my constituency, for instance, it would be very good if they got 3 of the 6 seats. They would not get any more. We're quite confident we will get 1 seat in Cardiff Penarth. That's one of the things that's baked in. But what the polling also shows in this constituency, that 6th seat is between Greens or Reform. That's true in about 7 of the marginal seats. The others are really hard to call because there'd be so few votes, a couple of hundred votes between it in some cases, that last seat. But in some seats like this one, people can vote Green in confidence, knowing that they're not only getting a Green Senedd member, increasing that strong Green voice in the next Welsh Parliament, a voice that will hold Plaid to account and make sure they deliver for the people of Wales, but also will mean 1 less Reform member in the Senedd. And then there are various scenarios the mathematics are going to be all over the place until we actually get to May the 8th and know what they are. But when Plaid look at their options, if they need to talk to other people, they want to talk to people who share a lot of their aspirations and are keen to deliver for the people of Wales? Or do they want to go into government or be supported by the party, Welsh Labour, that got us into this mess? So if you want strong Green voices in the Senedd, you really have to vote for us.
Anthony Slaughter, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, Aaron has just been in Wales to produce a report for Novara Media that'll be coming out on the channel this weekend. Aaron, tell us what conclusions you reached about the Senedd elections whilst you were there.
A few things. So firstly, we were hearing there a moment ago that Labour are one of the most successful parties in Europe, in the Western world, Welsh Labour. They've come first in every single Westminster election since 1922, Welsh Labour in Wales. They've come first in every single election in Wales, full stop, council elections, European elections, everything, Senedd, everything, since 1922, except the European elections in 2009. They have been the largest party at the Welsh Senedd for 27 years. This is a one-party state. The only country that comes close is Iceland, where you had the Icelandic Independence Party being numero uno from 1931 till 2009. But even they don't really touch Welsh Labour. And it's about to collapse. It's about to end. And because it's Wales, because it's not inside the M25, most of the London media doesn't really care. But it's a hugely important historic moment. And of course, it's not just Labour, it's the Tories too. So what we're seeing really with the Senedd elections in May is a controlled demolition of the two-party system. They'll be replaced, we don't know in what order, by Plaid and Reform. And I think to some extent, that may prefigure what happens at the next general election. So I think, before 2029, when people say, well, it's not possible that both parties will collapse, you'll have the reference point of, well, actually, look what happened in Wales in 2026. And unlike Scotland and the Red Wall, this is all very new. It's very quick. I think there's 32 seats in Wales, I think. In the 2024 general election, Labour won 27 of them. in the 2021 Welsh Senedd elections, so the elections we've got now, but 5 years ago, they picked up a member of the Senedd. So this was not a long time in the making, and I'm sure some people, Welsh viewers and listeners, will be saying, no, they were getting through on low turnouts. True. But it wasn't like the SNP, they were in government at Holyrood, for instance, before their big breakthrough at Westminster in 2015. That hasn't been the vibe in Wales. Very, very different. And so I think it's going to be an extraordinary moment. I also think it's going to open up a can of worms, in a good way, about what is devolution for. I don't think Welsh Labour really believed in devolution. They believe in it as a way of stealing thunder from Plaid. They think it's maybe a good thing. It's kind of modern, but there was never a vision for it. I'll give you one example of how poorly it's been done. Policing is devolved in England. We have police and crime commissioners. They're getting rid of them, but those powers will now go to metro mayors. Wales doesn't have that. So in Portsmouth, where I am, policing is devolved to a Hampshire police and crime commissioner since Cameron. We have more power over policing locally in Hampshire than the Welsh nation does. Very easy thing for Keir Starmer to have sorted straight away after 2024, but he didn't. And I think the only explanation as to why is because he couldn't be bothered. It doesn't really matter to him.
Well, to be fair, like the Labour came into office in Westminster on this idea of the greatest expansion of devolution, or the power being given to the nations and regions. That's all just gone. Like when you look for how much of this stuff has been subsumed back into the hands of Westminster, overruling West Midlands Police in Maccabi Tel Aviv and stuff like that. Like we have seen that Keir Starmer, another one of the very many kind of pledges that lies on the cutting room floor in terms of expanding devolution. And we're seeing that when there is a strong movement against that kind of thing, when you've got a national movement, a civic nationalist movement for sure in Wales, I think is what Plaid can probably represent at this point, rather than a separatist one, until that becomes more politically relevant. It's the easiest galvanising force to be able to depose Labour.
I think Wales is fascinating, and I think Welsh politics is going to be really fascinating. Like I say, we're seeing a controlled demolition of the big two. And I think it deserves so much more coverage. In that video, I was up in Merthyr Tydfil. Amazing place. Went to watch Merthyr Tydfil at Hampton Macclesfield. Very good standard of football, I have to say. They lost 2-1. They were unlucky. But, this is the place which first saw the red flag in 1831 in the Merthyr Uprising. The flag of the Soviet Union, the flag of the People's Republic of China, was based on the flag that flew in Merthyr Tydfil for the first time in 1831. First locomotive train anywhere, 1804, Merthyr. The first industrial application of Bessemer steel, Merthyr Tydfil. This was like a 19th century Shenzhen before Manchester, in the early part of the 19th century. The Welsh valleys were extraordinary places, and we don't know about any of this. We're not told about any of this. They're disconnected. There's no vision of the economic or political future for them. Well,
to the point at which, right, I mean, when there was the steel crisis, when it looked like there was going to be a steel plant collapsing in Scunthorpe, and the government came in emergency legislation to kind of temporarily nationalise. It looks like that's going to be pretty more permanent than we thought it was going to be. And yet, jobs in Port Talbot on the cutting floor.
Yeah, and it's a pattern, right? So if you look at HS2, for instance, not many people know this. HS2 is classified as a English and Welsh project. Right, it's not just English infrastructure, it's English and Welsh, which means that by virtue of spending huge sums of money in England and Wales, Scotland also gets a bit. But of course, HS2 doesn't go to Wales. And if it was classified as purely an English project, then as a result of the sort of devolution funding arrangement, Wales will get an extra £4 billion. So Wales has missed out on £4 billion for its transport because Whitehall said actually it's English and Welsh, even though it goes from Birmingham to bloody London. It's never going to go to Wales. I mean, if I was Welsh, I'd be so angry. And like I say, I go back to that thing about the police and crime commissioners. That was so easy. And, you talk to people, Plaid, Reform, whoever, and you say, well, hold on, he says he believes in all this stuff. Cost-free, easy, you're making it consistent with the arrangements in England. Why didn't you do it? Nobody could give me an answer. The only explanation is he doesn't know, he doesn't care, he isn't bothered. And I do think that Labour in London sincerely believed that Welsh Labour was unique and that Wales somehow is just, its DNA is Labour. They'll never leave the party.
They've got nowhere else to go.
They've got nowhere else to go. But actually, they've got many other places to go. They've got the Liberal Democrats, they've got Plaid, they've got Reform, and now they've got the Greens. And I'll also say this to finish. Unlike Scotland, unlike the Red Wall, Labour isn't under attack from just one side. Boris Johnson's Tories or the SNP. It's under attack genuinely under attack from 3 parties. And again, this should be panicking people in Labour circles. But you see Wes Streeting talking to the Times today while doing, his canvassing, just slagging off the Greens. And it's just, paint by numbers, identikit, political analysis. No, we're seeing a controlled demolition of your party, Wes.
They're staring down the worst local election results for an incumbent government ever.
Yeah, by far.
Beating the previous record holder, Keir Starmer.
Yeah. Although it should be said, I think last year, 400 and something Labour councillors were up for grabs. This time it's like 4 or 5 times that. Yeah, it's like 2,000 up for grabs. But I do think they'll do very poorly in those local elections in England. But I think, Wales will be the story. Like I say, the biggest party in Wales since 1922, every single general election, that's about to go.
When it's Gorton and Denton, on 10 times the scale.
It is. And like I say, more people should go. It's a remarkable place. These people deserve a future. They deserve a vision of what their country can be. And, Britain to some extent, England to some extent, still has that. We still have the M25. We still have bits and pieces, legacy institutions and parts of the market economy we can live off, right? Wales increasingly doesn't have that. I understand people that say that Welsh independence isn't pragmatic. London doesn't care about you. I don't know what else. That to me is just the best argument for independence. London literally doesn't care about you.
In Scotland, they call it Westmonster, right? That's the level of antipathy from Scottish nationalists towards London. And it's surprising that it's taken this long for the Welsh people to realise that, to be fair, Westminster probably even cared more about Scotland than they did about them.
100%. London does not care about you. They might care a little bit about Cardiff, but they don't care. They just think it's a strange little place on the side of England. They very rarely go. They might go to the Welsh borders. They might go to Hay-on-Wye, but they're not going to Swansea. They're not going to Newport. They're not going to Llanelli. They're not going to these places. They might go to Cardiff. And I'll finish with this bit of a rant. I think Wales has so much potential and some of the problems are so easy to sort. The distance between Merthyr and Cardiff is the exact same distance as Woking to London. The train journey takes twice as long. It could be, if it was a 25-minute journey, that would be a bonanza for both Cardiff and Merthyr. Quite a big place, right? 70,000 people. Nothing.
It's basically part and parcel of what we have seen from the singular electoral focus of uni-party politics for so long, which is there is a specific demographic of voters that we need to target because they're swing voters. Everyone else can get fucked. Yeah. That's basically been the political operation of the Conservative and Labour parties for 47 years, basically, ever since 1979. And that singular focus on those swing voters, on the understanding that their base is fine, Wales is fine, whatever it is, because they'll always vote for us, that's fallen away now. We're seeing it in post-industrial England, we're seeing it in inner cities across England as well, and of course, it is now happening everywhere, literally everywhere in Wales. People have realised that unless you withhold your vote, people won't listen to you. Valentina Gomez is a Colombian-American anti-Islam influencer who last month failed miserably in her attempt to be a Republican congressional candidate in Texas, losing by 50% in the primary despite raising 6 figures of campaign funds. Since then, she's moved on to her next stunt, trying to court the British far right at Tommy Robinson's upcoming Unite the Kingdom rally in May. Last week, she posted this on Twitter. Visa approved. See you on May the 16th in England. At Keir Starmer, Shabana Mahmood, UK Home Office, you're only good at protecting the Muslim rape gangs. Try to arrest me and see what happens. England belongs to the English, not to the Mohammeds. Well, in her hubris, this public display of her intentions brought enough notoriety and public outcry to lead to the UK government revoking her visa. Just as Kanye West before her, the government concluded her presence would not be, quote, conducive to the public good, due to both of her extremist beliefs. You can't keep her out of the spotlight too long, even if you can keep her out of the country. And what appears to be a desperate bid to remain relevant, she spoke to YouTuber Piers Morgan about her visa cancellation yesterday, where she was pressed by him on her demonization of the Muslim community.
I am asking you, because you brand all Muslims with the same way that you brand the people that committed the grooming gang scandal. You brand all Muslims the same way, but you have no idea how many Muslims there are. There are nearly 2 billion Muslims in this world. And what you're doing when you talk about them as a community of people
is you're tarring all 2 billion Muslims.
You're tarring all 2 billion.
That's still too many.
2 billion. You are tarring, let me finish. You are tarring all 2 billion people with the same brush of being killers and rapists and so on. To which I say to you, that is the purest personification of vile bigotry, racism, and Islamophobia? Why don't you focus on people of all religions
they follow a
who commit
book
heinous
that
crimes?
calls for the murder of Jews, Christians, Hindus, and infidels just because we don't bow down to their stupid rock, Piers Morgan. We don't do that in Christianity. In Christianity, if you want to be an atheist, if you want to worship a cow, if you want to worship a table, you're allowed to do that without getting killed.
Citation needed. I feel like the history of European Christianity has mostly been involved in exactly that, in exactly the oppression of those with different viewpoints. In fact, you look at, for example, the history of European Jewry, for example, they fled to the Ottoman Empire, who offered them refuge from European Christians. So you might want to open a history textbook, Valentina. Not that I'm sure she's read any textbooks. Now, also on Piers Morgan's YouTube show was British journalist Sami Hamdi. We've previously covered on NovaraLive how Hamdi was arrested and detained by ICE after his US visa was revoked after he had arrived without him being informed, on grounds of him allegedly supporting terrorism. He was brought in by Morgan to respond to Gomez's Islamophobic rhetoric, and he did not disappoint.
She keeps talking about this idea of rapists and the like. Piers, I went to the website of the Office for National Statistics and the Bureau of Justice of the Americans. And here you can see, these are all the victims saying who their perpetrators are. And here they say that it's people that they know, it's their family members, it's their friends, it's their acquaintances. Only this small number over here is done by strangers or what she calls grooming gangs. You can see the overwhelming majority are done by those that they know or those or their relatives. Nobody says this is white Christian sexual epidemic. If you look at the population, she says that they're being taken over. This is the population of Muslims in the UK and in the US. In the US, 1.1%, in the UK, 6%. Tell me, where is the takeover that's taking place here? Piers, when you look at the crimes that are committed against Brits, and I'm a Brit, I'm born and raised here, against our sisters and our daughters and the like, here are the crimes committed by Jimmy Savile and Rolf Harris. Nobody says this is white Christian rape. No one says this is a white Christian problem. Everybody says crime has no faith and it has no race. This was committed by vile individuals and justice should be delivered. Piers, when you look at the Office of National Statistics and you see the number of people incarcerated in the UK, you can see that they are overwhelmingly white. But nobody says that this country has a white criminal problem. No one says that this is a Christian problem. Everybody says this is a criminal problem by vile people because crime has no faith and crime has no race. Piers, when you look at the mass shootings in America that kill students and kill their children, this is the data from the Bureau of Justice in America. This is by white shooters, this is by ethnic minorities. No one says that in America they have a white Christian shooting problem because they know crime has no faith, they know crime has no race, and they know that it is individuals who need to be brought to justice.
I will point out, of course, when it comes to per capita numbers, that's slightly higher maybe for some ethnic minorities, right? But broadly, it doesn't make up to a particularly large demographic shift. And in a majority white country, majority Christian country, the majority of people in prison will be of that demographic, right? The idea that somehow there is a specific demographic that can be specifically called out as being responsible for these things obviously is nonsense unless you're being fed or are someone who is delivering propaganda to try and drive a certain political narrative. Now, finally, Hamdi was asked by Morgan whether or not it was right that Gomez had had her visa revoked.
Piers, part of me believes that it would have been good for Valentina to come and see the real Britain. The Britain that belongs to the family that I am in. The English blood that runs through my kids from Stenning, Brighton. It would have been good for her to come and meet the wonderful giants of Britain who are Muslim, like Timothy Winter in Cambridge, like Paul Williams, like Paul Keeler, like Suhail Hanif. It would have been good for her to see the realities of what Britain is like and how Muslims live in Britain and contribute to society. Because when Tucker Carlson finally saw it, instead of regurgitating the hate that he was doing in 2001, Tucker Carlson came out and said, I was wrong and I didn't know that Muslims love Jesus too and they believe in the second coming. When Candace finally got to see the reality, she came out and said that I was disgusted with myself for not looking in further. I believe Valentina is still young. She's in the early stages of what Tucker Carlson was. I'm asking her, skip the years that it takes to figure it out. Go and see what the world looks like. Go and see the reality because your message of hate didn't work.
I find it quite interesting. If you look at the whole clip, right, and you look at Piers Morgan's rhetoric and compare it to Sami Hamdi, Piers Morgan just goes, oh, you're being bigoted, you're being Islamophobic, you're being racist, but doesn't really kind of improve upon that analysis of what she said. But Sami Hamdi, really powerful, saying, look, here's the statistics to show that there is no like huge problem in terms of Muslims being an issue. When it comes to the people who've actually changed their opinions on this, it's because they've spent their time to spend time with those people that they demonize, to reach across the aisle and try and learn something.
Wow.
Which of these two approaches do you think is more successful?
I think Sami Hamdi offered a masterclass there, right? And I agree, actually, that she should be allowed in the UK for precisely that reason.
Yep, I agree.
The clip as well earlier about the things she was saying with regards to the Bible. I mean, there are awful things in the Bible. Awful. Abraham had slaves. Slavery is allowed in the Old Testament. God calls on collective punishment, things we'd consider war crimes. He calls on the Israelites to destroy entire cities, entire peoples. Jericho is the most famous example. So this idea that there's no conquest and death and collective punishment and even genocide in the Old Testament simply isn't true. We can park for a minute the things it says about same-sex relationships, about women, about all manner of things. Just what she mentioned there, completely inaccurate. And you're right, of course, that the history of European Christendom isn't quite as rosy as she seems to think. But I do think that she should have come here. And let me give you one example that I know of locally. So there's a local councillor in the city where I live. He's Pakistani. He's Labour, Pakistani Muslim. He was doing a litter pick with his son, who I think is maybe 10, maybe a bit younger. He was doing a litter pick with his son, just those two, in a poorer part of the city. They're from the north of the city, so, it's the less affluent part of the city. They were doing a litter pick. I think it was his son's birthday. And a bunch of reform guys basically start calling them names. They were pissed. They were drunk. They start being abusive, obnoxious. Who's being decent and civilized in that situation? Is it the people that are trying to make their city better? They just happen to be Muslims? Or is it the pissed up middle-aged men literally intimidating a child trying to pick up litter? I mean, it's pathetic. So the idea that people like that are a problem is obviously absurd. And also, finally, this kind of revisiting of what Islam is by the likes of Tucker Carlson, Candy Summons is really interesting. If you speak to, particularly my limited knowledge about this is Iranian women, very common name in Iran, Maryam, Mary, mother of Jesus, a virgin in Islam as well as Christianity. They say, I cover my hair because I want to maintain the modesty of Maryam. That should be quite if you're a Christian Western country, that should be quite an easy thing to understand. You might not agree with it, but it should be quite easy to understand. And yet the veil, the head covering, is viewed as something very alien, very foreign, actually completely at odds with Christianity. I think what Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, I don't agree with Candace Owens on very much, to be quite frank. But what I think they realised is actually on things like that, they're more in touch with the kind of Christian heritage of Europe than modern Europe is. Fine, you might think, good, whatever, but it's not a foreign import. That's the point, right? There are common roots that nourish both Islam and Christianity and Judaism. The two agree on some things and disagree on others. But things like the head covering, the relationship to the Virgin Mary, the relationship to Jesus Christ. He's not the Messiah in Islam, but he is a prophet and he's going to come back. There's a Jesus 2.0 in Christianity and Islam. These are things that I think, frankly, it's the ignorance of these things which allows, Islamophobic bigotry to thrive. And I do agree that actually the more you talk about it, the more exposure there is, the less of it you'll see.
I think what is sad as well is I think that we're entering this era where you see people who just want to find the most outrageous thing that they can say gains them fame and notoriety online on the internet with following the algorithms, when actually the expansion of things like the internet and social media has been a great vector for some people to experience and to learn about cultures they never would have done otherwise. And I think that if we have more of an opportunity to understand those things, then it can only lead to a good place. Like you look at in the wake of the Southport riots in the UK, where huge amounts of damage done in Southport. First community on the scene out there, trying to clean things up, people coming together from all different communities, but there was Muslims from the local mosque coming there to help clean up their own city, to help clean up their own town, to be able to repair the damage that had been done by discohesion. And it really is, I think, it's civilizational vandalism that we have so much space here for people who are only there to not serve a narrative because they believe it to be correct, but to do so because there is an algorithmic engagement with which to do so.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's quite new, you know. You read these books from the early 2000s talking about how wonderful Islam is. But then, of course, you get 9/11, you get the war on terror. And clearly in the West, many things have gone wrong since the global financial crisis of 2008. And it's a very easy enemy, a very identifiable enemy as well. This is really important.
It's a specifically really good enemy to have in a world where there's no Soviet Union anymore.
Well,
right?
quite.
It's the same. We backed Islam against the communists in Afghanistan, and they were the heroes. They were the brave fighters of the Mujahideen back then. So now there's no Soviet Union. There is no geopolitical bloc with which the West can be able to position itself against. Post 2001 world, suddenly it's against Islam.
But the beauty of Islam is, with regards to that, is that they're local. You can see them. Right. So during the Cold War, the threat of the Soviet Union, whatever, the perceived threat of the Soviet Union, was quite an alien, distant thing. Right. But actually, if you're really upset with your life and your city and your locality and things aren't going well and actually decline, right, is a big thing. By the way, it's very real. We are in decline because of our economic system, because of what's happened in the global economy in the West really over the last 20 years. You might think that's all real, and that the amazing thing with Islam as a source of bigotry is there's a guy up the road. There's a mosque that's being built, right? So it's not, completely alien. And you haven't met the 1%. You don't know any billionaires. You've maybe never been to West London. You've never maybe been to London, right? Bishop's Avenue, Millionaires Row. So you only know what you see. And what you see is there are these people over here and there's this big meta-narrative about how they're the problem. I have to say, a few years ago, I was working for IPPR, think tank, just freelance work. And we were recording a video. I shouldn't really say this, should I? We were recording a video about a particular document they were bringing out. And one of the funders was speaking in the video, right? This big hedge fund guy, I think, big finance guy. And we were recording this clip that he was going to say. And I went to his flat in Mayfair. I didn't realize flats could be this big. I mean, I'm being deadly serious. I had no idea. And I go in there and I see the size of it. There's a gym there, 5 or 6 bedrooms. It's like caves. It's just endless. And I'm thinking, wow. And I'm somebody, I've studied in London. I've lived here 15 years, master's degree, UCL. My wife went to the LSE. The LSE on a Friday, they're all taking their bags to the airport to go back home to Rome or Paris or Stockholm. But even for somebody like me, I was like, I've never seen this before. And so it's very, very hard to comprehend who the quote-unquote enemy is or who is benefiting from this failing economic system. So Muslims are so convenient in so many ways.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And I think that one piece of data, one data point that really hammers this home, right, is that when you look at the kind of people who have this really kind of thermostatic reaction to changing demographics and migration, they don't live in areas with high migration. They live in areas that could potentially be areas with high migration. Right? You see the narrative is, when you look at London, people who write narratives about how bad London is, how crime-ridden it is, don't live in London. It's a way of, there's a scare campaign from the right, especially to paint the leafy suburbia, painting little villages and towns outside of London as this is what you will become if we allow this level of immigration, right? When actually, if there's more contact, if there was more direct contact between these communities, and we saw, like what happened post-Southport, we saw these communities coming together. We saw one of the Green candidates to potentially be there, to be selected for Gordon Denton, Faisal Reza Khan. He put together a whole community group in response to the arena bombings in Manchester to make sure that there was community cohesion. And that level of coming together, when you experience it firsthand, it's a really good way to be able to push past the simple bigotries and the simple narratives that can be driven by those who haven't had direct experience of multiculturalism. So
we're having a bit of a lib love-in. So somebody who's right-wing, GB News watching, or maybe a Reform person might be not liking what we're saying. So let me sort of, I agree with you, but let me just sort of wind back. So again, this was a kind of eye-opening moment for me when I was in Runcorn, covering the by-election. Very white, it's in Cheshire, very, very white place. And I remember being in a really run-down part of Runcorn. I can't remember what it's called, Shopping City, Shopping Centre, 70s style shopping centre. It's seen better days, lots of it's closed. And then mostly older, lots of white people, leave voting. It'd been Labour. Reform won by 6 votes. I thought Reform actually probably won by more, but I think Labour had a great postal vote campaign. Regardless, I've been walking around all day, very lovely people, lots of pubs, sunny day, lots of beer, a bit like today. And then when I'm there are 4 guys and they're speaking what sounds like maybe Ethiopian or Somali. They're sat down just together talking. And it kind of clicked. in London, I wouldn't think twice about these guys. But because Runcorn is so white, that's precisely why it becomes conspicuous. So that's me sort of trying to explain that phenomenon a bit, which I never really understood, but now I understand it a little bit better. And then in terms of these scare stories about London, which I've been thinking about a lot, crime in London's gone down.
It has, significantly.
Massively. And you see the photos of London from the 70s and the 80s, the 90s. It looks a lot better now. It's not working for working people, but it looks a lot better now. However, I think we have a significant amount of low-level crime, shoplifting, mobile phone theft, graffiti, whatever. And I just think the fact this is now recordable and distributable through social media networks and mobile phones, I think that has changed the political consciousness of people a bit, even including people in London. So I don't know how you address that. Do you just say it's fake? Do you just put it down as a technological phenomenon? But I do feel like that low-level antisocial stuff, you might not find it antisocial, some people do, that low-level antisocial stuff now being recorded, now being shared, and there are incentives to share it, to get outraged, to get attention. I do think that's a challenge for the left.
Oh, certainly, I think it is. I mean, there was a Hassan Piker clip on an MIT podcast just recently where he's talking about like the efficacy of stealing from large corporations. I'm like, well, this kind of stuff we shouldn't be treating as whether we care about the individual action or not. There's a socially deleterious effect of allowing the social contract to break down to the point people feel emboldened to not care. And that is what the left's project should be. We need to be fixing all of the underlying things. We need to create a new social contract to be able to bring people in and talk about the systemic failures that have led us to this point, which is, of course, this fact that outside, I think Aaron Jarjit-Dubé's latest book about the wage model has shown that outside of 7 years of tight labour markets, working people, very little gains outside of the existing growth level, very little actual gains in terms of wage labour. And we need to fix that because otherwise, if we continue down this road where social fabric breaks apart, people continually in this world of cost of living crisis, that low-level crime will continue to be exacerbated and we'll end up in this, it'll only go further down to make our society feel less cohesive because we can't live as the left in this world of there being no society. That's our project moving forward, is to find what that new society looks like and how we engage in policy to be able to get us there.
Completely agree. Completely agree.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for joining me tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. I was sick as a parrot at the start, but I picked up thanks to your expert hosting, I think, Helena.
Absolutely. I mean, once you got your teeth into something, an intellectual morsel, very difficult for you to stop chewing.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank everyone else for tuning in at home as well. Come back on Monday for another show from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.